Welcome to another roundtable. We've been doing this for almost 9 months during the pandemic, and we've had some wonderful featured speakers. And today we have a huge panel of experts of our leadership in GPSolo. We have Judge Childs from South Carolina, Alfreda Coward, our illustrious leader from Florida. We have Samantha Grant, an employment lawyer from Los Angeles on the West Coast, Wayne McKenzie from New York, and Warren Thomas as well. So welcome everybody to us. We'll start in a couple minutes. I just wanted to make sure everybody is here and knows what we're doing. So thank you all for coming. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Casey Branch, and we started this about 9 months ago, and I'm a wine and distilled spirits lawyer out of California. And if you hadn't seen my or saw the webinar I did the other day, I'm sure it's available on demand. A lot of people found it very interesting in terms of what I do. It's a different way of practicing law. So feel free to go do that if you've got questions. If you ask questions during that, I'm sending out email answers to everybody for those questions. We'll go ahead and start here in a few minutes on our discussion, and to celebrate our winter, what's the proper name for it, Alfreda? Our winter?
A GPSolo Winter Summit.
Winter Summit, okay. So Alfreda, why don't you say a few introductory words now that we're at the top of the hour, and then we'll start the substantive program in about 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for our 2020 Winter Summit. I'm excited about this afternoon's programming. I have the pleasure of having chairs, vice chairs, and chairs-elect people of color throughout the ABA this year. We're expecting to have some real informative conversations, talking about some hot topics, 2020 hindsights and new beginnings. We want to talk about the things that we've experienced in 2020, things such as the COVID pandemic and its implications, George Floyd and the civil unrest, voting rights as it relates to the loss of John Lewis, as well as Justice Ginsburg. So we have a lot that we could talk about. We want to talk about the unique challenges and opportunities we face as people of color in chairs during this year. We got so many things that we could talk about. So we are excited to talk about. We're just hoping we can squeeze it in this 1 hour. But guess what? If we don't fit it in, we have opportunities to come back and try this again. This has been such an enlightening and very rewarding experience for all of us that are participating today. We've already discussed doing future ventures in the future, as well as collaborating and make sure that we bring attention to the things that are important to our membership. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you very much to the panelists in advance for all I know you're going to say, the great job you're going to do. So thank you again.
Thank you, Alfreda, and welcome to our roundtable, all of you. So we're going to go ahead and start with the program. I know we often wait a few minutes before we start, but today we're going to go ahead and do it. So we're going to start with Judge Michelle Childs, and she went to the other USC. See, I went to the University of Southern California, but she went to the real USC called the University of South Carolina. So great for that. So she's a very active judge in South Carolina, and she's going to introduce herself a little bit more and talk about her group's initiatives. And then we're going to do that for each of the panelists for a few minutes, and then we'll come back around and start some substantive discussions. So Judge Childs, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it's such a wonderful opportunity to be invited on this panel with such esteemed guests. I've had the opportunity to meet everyone, and I've also grown up in the ABA with some of our panelists. I was in Young Lawyers Division. I've also been in sectional litigation. I'm also part of GPSolo section and have been for years. And I'm now chair of the ABA Judicial Division. Some quick initiatives that we started were this year for diversity, educational enrichment, access to justice, and then just a COVID-19 project as well. Under those arms, under diversity, we have really tried to meet people where they are. We usually have a lot of meetings at the ABA meetings, but instead we wanted to meet people where they are. So we did our first ever initiative on minority and other schools. with respect to Howard University Law School. We also do educational enrichment, first Thursday seminars, where we're enriching judges with respect to hot and cutting edge topics so that we're better equipped as teaching you all as practitioners. And then of course we need to take care of ourselves. So every second Wednesday of the month, we do a Wellness Wednesday seminar that's been on judicial security, as well as coping with COVID and some opportunities for judges. And then finally, access to justice. We're all in COVID-19, but we need to make sure that those who do not have the opportunity to have lawyers can afford to come to court, but then also we're not disadvantaging them through our systems of participating by Zoom and other mechanisms online. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judge Childs. Next we have Samantha Grant, a lawyer in Los Angeles representing many employers.
Aaron, are you supposed to be back in school, in class? Because it says iReady.
Listen, all of us who have these kids that's in school on Zoom, we all understand that problem.
I don't see how parents do it. I'm glad my children are old. I really am. So in any event, Samantha Grant, it's your turn, and thank you for all your efforts in the bar and to with all the working on the racial equality material and all your time with the American Bar Association. So Samantha, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak on this panel with these esteemed panelists. I am a partner in labor and employment law at SheppardMullin. I have the privilege of serving as chair of the section of labor and employment law. I am the first woman of color to chair the section of labor and employment law, and in particular, the first Black woman to chair the section. Even prior to the global reckoning on racial equity, I had planned to focus my year a lot on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the profession. In fact, at the inception of the year, we changed our committee name from Diversity and Inclusion Committee to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, because we realized really to move the needle, we need that equity component. I was also very proud that at this year, in anticipation of this year, we created a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Champion Award, which we named after Judge Bernice Donald, who is a Black female trailblazing judge in Memphis. She sits on the Sixth Circuit. And so we're very happy that we were able to name that award after her this year. And we also had our section conference recently, at which we, again, not even knowing about the racial equity reckoning, last year in planning, we added a diversity, equity, and inclusion track to the section conference. It was a very popular track and very well attended and very well received. And we also this year, before the bar year started, but a couple of months before the bar year started, we launched ABA LEL 21-day racial equity habit building challenge. I know we're going to talk more about that, but that is something that also has carried into this year. So diversity, equity, inclusion is something that is near and dear to me and to the section. Is one of our core values, and many of our initiatives this year have been focused on that, and that's what I'll focus my remarks on too. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Appreciate you being here. Wayne McKenzie, you're up next. Wayne McKenzie is General Counsel for the New York City Department of Probation. God, that's got to be a huge, huge job. We admire your administrative skills just to keep it in track. Plus, you seem like you're an incredible lawyer with an incredible background, and you've spent a lot of time working with the ABA. And now you're the chair-elect of the Committee on Gun Violence. So you are a busy man. So Wayne, why don't you tell us a little bit about your group's initiatives and say anything more you'd like to say about yourself.
Okay, great, thanks. Let me start by saying that I feel really honored and privileged by joining this esteemed group of panelists. And Samantha, I want to especially thank you for recognizing the amazing, talented, incredible individual that Judge Bernice Donald is. She's a recent past chair of the section, and she's one of my personal sheroes. So I've got to give you props for that. Yeah, so for me, I'm the chair-elect of the criminal justice section, although I am actively involved in working with the gun violence committee as well. And our section, I would say even before this year, had started doing a lot of initiatives in the racial justice and equity field. And our chair this year, April Frazier Camara, has actually dedicated her administration around issues of racial justice and equity, not just externally, but within our section, because our section, we're celebrating our 100th year anniversary. And so we are looking within at how we have done things and also without as well. So for example, internally, we're actually going back and looking at all of our past resolutions and policies through a racial justice and equity lens to see where we can strengthen it in that regard. The other thing that we've been doing for the past 2 years and continuing strongly is under the leadership of Judge Bernice Donald and Professor Sarah Redfield. We've undertaken this huge implicit bias project where we've written a book about it, and we're constantly doing trainings around the country. The other ongoing effort is our Women in the Law task force. And while that started as a one-year task force, not only has April's administration committed to continuing looking at the work and the role of women in the law, I've already dedicated my commitment during my year as head of the section to working with that task force. And obviously, when you think about where we are in this racial justice environment now, we're also doing a lot of work around policing. Not only has the ABA reactivated some of our policies in our urban policing standards, but a lot of our initiatives and a lot of our programming right now is in the area of racial justice and equity. I can go on and on about specific efforts, but then I take up this entire panel's time. So
We'd love to have you. We'd love to have you back and do that for a full roundtable. So you're welcome back anytime. We'll get your people with our people and make sure that happens. So so nice to meet you and thank you for coming. Last we have Juan Thomas, a trial lawyer from Los Angeles. I looked at his building, and his building, I think, is the same one that Aaron Brockovich's firm moved in the movie. When they won their big award. So he's with a firm called Quintairos, Prieto, Wood & Boyer, one of the famed diversity. I think it's the largest minority and women-owned law firm in the country. And he's going to give us a little bit of background on himself and his civil rights and social justice efforts for the ABA. So Juan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First, I want to clarify, I'm in Chicago, not Los Angeles. The weather may be better in LA, but I'm not there today. And I'm just very excited to be here with my friends and colleagues. Judge Childs and I go back to our young lawyers days in the ABA. And she was smart enough to get a job where she's always going to be called judge. And so we're very honored to see her and thank her for her leadership. It's good to see my dear friend, Samantha Grant, and also Alfreda Coward. From my NBA days, a lot of us wear multiple bar hats. And so it's good to see my NBA family. I also see our NBA folks in the chat. I believe Sheila Boston, who I want to shout out to because she is I think she's the first Black woman president of the New York Bar Association. And she's a dear friend and supporter. And her and her brother, Jamie Boston, are very active members of the National Bar Association. So I'm honored to be the vice chair of the Civil Rights and Justice section for the ABA. And quite candidly, I'm in this position because of the leadership and vision of our chair 2 years ago, Will Schooley, out of San Diego, California. Will and I became friends through our both serving on the Human Rights magazine editorial board for the section. And he thought enough of me to ask me to become part of the leadership of this section. And I bring him up because during his year as chair, his focus was on being Black in America. Before George Floyd was killed this summer, before Breonna Taylor was killed this past winter, a past chair 2 years ago was focused on being Black in America. And it's so apropos that he had that conversation then and how important it is now. And so our section this year has been focused on not only collaborating with many sections across the ABA and other entities in the legal community, but we're also focused on pushing public policy. And so one thing we did this year in the House of Delegates, we sponsored a resolution to call for the elimination and termination of qualified immunity for police officers. And so that was adopted by the ABA House of Delegates. And we're very proud of that. We offered many resolutions also around police reform more broadly. And so obviously, just by the sheer name of our section, this year has been a year of the need to refocus on civil rights and social justice, not only around the policing reform, but also around the pandemic. You know, we learned this year that there is a economic crisis in the Black and brown communities where there's not economic justice, there's not environmental justice, there's not healthcare justice. And so much of our work has been about bringing attention to these issues. And so our current chair, Angela Scott, out of Maryland, has been working to really make civil rights the cornerstone of her administration. One thing we're doing is working on a podcast that we hope to amplify these issues. And then one last thing I'm going to share before I pause. Our incoming chair, I'm the vice chair, our chair-elect is Beth Wintenberry out of California. Her focus is on civic education next year. And it's so important that we think about how important it is that we educate people about civics and about government. I think much of our divide in our country is based upon the fact that people are not knowledgeable and aren't properly educated around how government works and the role of government and the role of being an engaged civic American citizen. And so I'm glad that Beth is going to raise that as her when she's chair. And I hope to continue that effort when I'm chair 2 years later.
Well, welcome so much. Thank you for participating, Juan and everybody else. So we're going to give the floor back to Samantha, and she's going to tell us about this 21-day program. So Samantha, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Casey. So as I mentioned, the ABA launched its own 21-day racial equity habit building challenge. And the concept of the 21 racial equity habit building challenge is actually copyrighted by Dr. Eddie Moore, who conceived the concept of doing a 21 racial equity habit building challenge several years ago. He's a diversity expert, and he realized that sort of doing this one-off training for a couple of hours, every few months or every year didn't actually help move the needle. And so he launched this to help people receive a deeper understanding of the intersections of race, power, and privilege. And the challenge, the concept of the challenge, his concept invited participants to complete a 21-day syllabus of relatively short assignments, which include readings, videos, podcasts. And Dr. Moore generously shared this concept as an education tool with everyone. Actually, it's on his website as an education tool. And so the section led by myself and now chair-elect Kelly Dermody decided to adopt this 21-day challenge concept. And we created our own syllabus around that challenge. And we intentionally focused it on anti-Black racism and racial equity. And we wanted to focus, although it could have focused more broadly just on, diversity concepts or different communities. But, given where we are in 2020, we made a conscious choice to focus on the Black experience in America, including perspectives on elements of Black history, identity, and culture, and the Black community's experience of racism in America. And, we realize that even in focusing on the Black experience is very diverse. But we try to come up with a list of assignments to try to highlight these diversity of experiences and opinions within the Black community. But we realize that we couldn't capture obviously everybody's experience and opinion, much less substitute learnings about the separate histories, cultures, and joys and challenges of many other communities of color. So our syllabus was just an introduction to what we hoped would be a rewarding journey, extending far beyond the limits of this particular syllabus, and which would empower and encourage other attorneys to make meaningful and impactful systemic changes toward achieving racial equity in our profession and broader communities. The challenge was very well received. A number of other sections, divisions, and forums did our syllabus. A couple of others created their own syllabus within their section. And beyond the ABA, there are many law schools, judiciaries, hospitals, little leagues, Rotary clubs, corporate law departments, all around the country and also outside of the country, who also did our syllabus and emailed us to let us know that they were joining us in the 21-day challenge, which was really great. And I'll just mention, I'm Canadian, so I'm from Toronto, so I'll give a shout out to the Ontario Law Society, which is the the society that governs lawyers in the province of Ontario in Canada. And they actually are giving CLE credit for the lawyers in Ontario who are doing the ABA LEL's challenge. So I thought that was pretty great that they actually recognize it so much that they were giving CLE credit for participating in our challenge. And I also serve, as Juan does too, and a number of us, on the ABA Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council. And through that council, we actually are launching an ABA-wide 21-day challenge with all of the sections, divisions, and forums. And we're inviting all of them to submit 1 or 2 lessons, which the committee that is running this new challenge will select and put into a new 21-day syllabus. And that challenge is going to be focused on, the different aspects of the section, divisions, and forums. And we've talked about sort of like as these leaders about what, how COVID, racial equity, et cetera, impacts like our particular practice areas. And so we thought a great thing about doing an ABA-wide challenge is that each division, section, and forum can focus on racial equity in their particular practice area, whether that's, real property or civil rights or criminal law or labor and employment, and that we would bring together, lessons across these sections, divisions, and forums. And so I look forward to Juan and I and the rest of the team working on that ABA-wide challenge.
So is a goal of the program or one of the goals to have people who aren't of color understand the Black perspective and find out where they're coming from? Is that a huge goal that we're working with here?
That is one of the goals, because especially in light of the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, there was a desire apparently in the communities outside of the Black community to learn more about the Black experience. And as we moved around and into this racial equity reckoning, there was a desire for more education. And rather than sort of in some ways burdening further the Black community by having to explain, everything, we thought it was a good way to put this educational tool out so that when we have these conversations with people, we can meet them in their learning a little bit further down the road. Although, many of us who are, Black, we did the challenge because, for example, there's a piece in the 21-day challenge on the Black transgender experience. So even as a Black, woman, I have not been through the Black transgender experience. And so that was a learning for me. So I feel like the challenge has something for everybody because there are different aspects, again, because not everybody in the Black community thinks the same thing on all issues or is aware of all of everybody else's experiences. So for us, there's something to learn as well. But outside of our community, we definitely felt like there were a lot of people who wanted to learn more. And so, for example, there's a piece on how to be an effective ally, or how to react when somebody's trying to, help you sort of be at least less anti-racist or more inclusive or something, and how to, receive comments that people are, given to you out of a position of goodwill. And the reaction has been great. I mean, I've had like some leaders, tell me like, oh my gosh, when I read the piece on white fragility, it really resonated with me. And, I'm going to, look at things, differently going forward. And so I've actually seen changes in, friends and colleagues, even, within the ABA after going through this 21-day challenge. And for the LEL section, we actually, I know the Judicial Division under Judge Childs did this too. We had weekly meetings as we actually went through the 21-day challenge, where we talked about what we're all reading, and they were very meaningful and sort of brought us, together as one LEL community across, race, gender, which was really meaningful for us to all be able to talk about these issues candidly and in a safe space.
Judge Childs, do you want to pipe in?
Sure. I had actually joined the LEL challenge and then thought it was a great idea for the judiciary, because when you talk about the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors, ultimately judges are going to be making these decisions with respect to suppression issues, how a trial will be carried out, witness credibility, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to be more sensitized. I know that we were dealing a lot with implicit bias through Judge Bernice Donald when she and Sarah Redfield were kind of traveling the country implementing those issues. But our conference represents administrative law judges, specialized court judges, state and federal trial and appellate judges. And then we have a lawyers conference who supports us. So when we did the challenge, we made sure that there were our leaders within period of time doing the same thing, how we sensitize each other and just we're in safe space to just listen to each other. Another thing that while I was on the executive committee of the National Conference of Federal Trial Judges before I took this position, we actually did a resolution through the House because we wanted to get more diversity within our ranks, particularly in the area of bankruptcy judges who are appointed by the circuit court judges. And then, of course, magistrate judges as well, who are appointed by district court judges. That resolution thankfully passed without any issues in the House, but we also wanted to sensitize that even in our courthouses, we needed more diversity in that regard too. From this challenge, instead of just doing the readings, I'm with Samantha on that. Let's talk more, because we've had several discussions time and again. So the judges, at my initiative from the challenge, will be doing the implicit bias test ourselves, and then having more discussion around that and more readings around that, because people were so hungry to get this information. It opened up perspectives from each other. And the main thing is that we have a conversation and a lens toward listening and trying to understand each other and hopefully act differently, because we're now more aware.
Thank you. I wanted to welcome everybody again to our roundtable, and you're certainly welcome to chime in with questions, either directly in the chat room or to make comments. So feel free to raise your hand or otherwise speak up so you can participate, because this is a roundtable for everybody, not just the panel. So feel free to do that. Don't be shy. So I have a question about other minorities who aren't Black, and how are they taking this when you've got the Latins and the Asians and other nationalities from around the world? Do they see this as an opportunity to learn about the Black community, or is it an eye-opening experience for all of us as to them as well? That's for anybody who wants to take the question.
I was waiting to see. Go ahead, Juan.
So I will say my friends in the Asian community have been quite frustrated in this year as how this pandemic has been turned against their community, calling it the China virus, or it came from China. That's caused a lot of angst in their community. And I don't know if that's gotten a lot of attention or enough attention in the broader community. So I know there's been some sensitivities there, but I think this is an opportunity for all communities of color to come together and collaborate. But I also think it's an opportunity for the white community to do some self-evaluation and hold themselves accountable. And so I think all of us, regardless of our particular cultural background, have a responsibility to be more intentional in these conversations. And that's why I think Judge Childs referenced the book White Fragility that I've been reading this summer, that talks about how this whole racial reckoning has been an uncomfortable place historically and continues to be a challenge for our white brothers and sisters. And so I think, candidly, white folks need to talk about this too, and deal with these issues. These conversations just can't be had with people of color, because structural racism and systemic racism, we always talk about it in the abstract. We don't want to say, because it's not politically correct, that oftentimes it's being perpetuated by our white brothers and sisters. And so I think we have to all kind of own that and have some uncomfortable conversations beyond just one particular ethnic group.
If I can say something slightly controversial for Asians, I'm South Asian. I come from a community that's not part of the caste, part of the Indian caste system. And so we have been fighting a very different kind of discrimination in India for years. And right now, the government that's in power is supported by a major right-wing Hindu fundamentalist group, and that group finds inspiration from the Nazi regime and is basically a sort of a white supremacist group. And so this summer, I found it really interesting. I found myself in a very difficult position because I come from this, like South India, and from this caste background. I always very much identify and align with Black struggle. But then Kamala Harris gets into power, and she's from this Brahmin Indian background, but she's Black and African. And it was really difficult for me to try to reconcile what to do, because on the one hand, she's a woman of color. On the other hand, she's being presented everywhere as coming from this specific caste background that I know believes in some version of white supremacy. And I talked to a lot of my white friends who are conservatives, and for them, she read as white because of that. She didn't read as Black to them. And so I find myself in this really strange position where it's not necessarily anymore about skin color, because in India, as you all know, you can be as white and blue and blonde as somebody from Northern Europe, and you can be as Black and beautiful and as anybody else. We have all colors. And so I think something that's happening in the US right now is that we're no longer necessarily able to read people's view on human equality based on the way that they look. And so it's encouraged me to try, and I was so grateful to Black struggle, because this summer, while I was crying and I was feeling so, well, not really crying, but I was churning with all of this, Isabel Wilkerson comes out with Caste. And I was like, I love you.
No, I was thinking about, have you read Caste? Right.
And there's this beautiful
great book.
There's this beautiful book called Colored Cosmopolitanisms, and it goes into the huge history of how the abolitionist movement has inspired, saved, and liberated many people in India in the caste system. And so it was just, such a beautiful moment for me. And I know I can rely on Black struggle to be sensitive. I mean, yesterday we were in a diversity event where the nuances of the conversation about like how to create pathways for growth and thriving. It's such a beautiful political ideology that I put my trust in it. And I think we need to, there are some ideologies that people who are white share, that we're also anti-abolitionist, that we're egalitarian. And then there are these very dangerous ideologies of white supremacy that many white people don't realize they implicitly share in and further. And a lot of Indians actively realize and aspire to be a part of white supremacy. So I think it's also a moment to realize that it's not just a POC question anymore. It's what do you believe? And this is kind of the Frederick Douglass question, right? What do you see when you see a human being? That's my 2 cents from the POC person.
Thanks, Lakshmi.
Thanks, Casey.
So what do we think, panel?
I think those comments are very interesting, especially when you take into account that Dr. Martin Luther King learned so much from Mahatma Gandhi's.
Well, I would just go further and say one of the powerful elements of white supremacy and white privilege is that we don't discuss it. It's hidden. And most people will only call something racist when it's overt, when it's obvious. So when someone uses the N-word, when someone is marching down with a Nazi flag down the street, when they say we don't like Black people or any other particular group of people, the more subtle, the more sophisticated, the more structural, the ones that we deal with as professionals is often not viewed as racist. We would hire more Black people if we could just find more qualified Black people. Right?
Amen.
We would promote more Black people if they were qualified and talented. Right?
Right.
That's the kind of more subtle, sophisticated. We would vote for a Black person if they were qualified for the office. But we never talk about qualifications when it comes to white people. When was the last time someone said we want to make sure that all of our white candidates are qualified?
Wouldn't that be something?
Right.
This is you know, I've been reading and listening a lot to Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, and he puts it so well in terms of it is all about power.
Yes.
And not people or color or any other division. It's just a power thing.
But I think we're talking about powers. It has a little bit more than, because what comes with power is opportunities. And so we maybe can say it's about power, but it really come back to color, because people of color don't have the same opportunities. So yes, your one background may have greater opportunities to be able to be in positions of power and then get the respect that comes with that power. But people of color that oftentimes look like us don't have those opportunities.
That's why we have to be allies and call out every instance of pushing down people.
I don't want to dominate this discussion, but I want to make a point that I just realized by talking to a law student last week. Black law students who are still first generation law students, future lawyers in their families, are struggling to find summer jobs next summer because all of us, they're all at home taking classes. They're not engaging with their career services department to help find summer internships for the summer. And so I was talking to a Black law student who goes to Vanderbilt in Nashville, and she was telling me that her classmates don't know where to turn because there's no structural support. It made me begin to wonder how many other BALSA chapters across the country are having these challenges. I make that example because she said many of her white classmates have relationships, have contacts, going back to power. Their uncle is a lawyer. Their mom's friend is a lawyer or a judge. Most of us are still the only lawyer in the family.
What's the matter with Vanderbilt's law school placement?
Well, everybody's dispersed. And that's just one example.
Well, I tried to hire a law clerk through my law school, and it was so complicated, and it became an app, and you had to put it on your phone, and and then you have to pay $39 every month on a recurring basis just to hire somebody. And it became just such an effort that I just canceled it and never ended up hiring anybody. But But Juan, you can have her call me, and I have something for her.
I will do that. But I make that point because it underscores the point that Alfreda was making about power, access, and privilege. And we're still at that first generation of, many of us are still first generation college graduates. I mean, how many African Americans can say both of their parents or their grandparents were college graduates?
Right, but the first doesn't just apply to our families. We were talking this panel. We were talking offline. We talked about how we're still making history right now in 2020. So in 2020, I'm now serving as the first Black female that's the chair of my division. And Samantha is similarly situated. And I think Wayne, you were sharing with us about the first. So Wayne, why don't you elaborate with us the first, so we can see the history we're making just by being here, and we're still in 2020. Wayne.
Yeah, when I was talking about even the history of the criminal justice section, we are currently in a situation where for the first time we've had two women succeed each other. Our immediate past chair, Kim Parker, being succeeded by April Frazier Camara. And then for the first time in the history of this section, two African Americans are set to succeed one another. I'm coming after April. And that sort of speaks to two different things. There was at one point, yes, where the section became more intentional about diversity and inclusion. But what came out of that was all of this amazing talent where we were able to accomplish certain things on our own merit because we were given that opportunity, right? So we actually earned our seat at the table. And I think that's a great lesson when Juan was talking about it. And I do think it's power and opportunity. They definitely go hand in hand. In my role as a past president, or when I was president of the National Black Prosecutors Association, I knew what it meant to go into a prosecutor's office and where I can talk about diversity and race and opportunity in a way that the Black and brown prosecutors in that office could not. So I had to speak for them. I had the power and authority to speak for them. Being in leadership in a DA's office or where I am in probation right now, I know what power does and the doors that it opens for individuals. So you're both so right.
And I was just going to offer that for those students, Juan, Just the Beginning Foundation is a minority judges association from the judges, mostly federal judges, and they place students as interns around federal judges who are interested in having people come to their chambers over the summer to give them that opportunity. And many of those students actually get hired on as federal law clerks. We know that there is a very discouraging amount of actually people of color in federal law clerks. I would also suggest that we shouldn't be fragile to hiring people who look like us as well. We do have that power, and so we should have the opportunity to look out for others as well. Sometimes I believe we get fragile because we don't see others our power and our position of influence. Also, we should be talking to these career services outfit coming on into judiciary, being very considerate of all persons in terms of who they're sending to us for these opportunities, whether to intern or to have a more permanent position within our respective firms or the judiciary.
I noticed there was a question in the chat someone had about being more intentional.
Right.
I don't know.
I'm sorry, it's Jamie. How are you doing, everybody? The question, and kind of piggyback off with what Juan said as well, just Childs and I think Miriam. I think this is a perfect example. This roundtable is a perfect example of how we as bar associations have to be more intentional with our programming and reaching out to people like Juan was discussing. All of us right here have the connections to hire somebody in some form of fashion, but we're not talking about these type of issues on a regular basis. So, I'm really struck by what Juan said, and there's no reason the GPSolo division, no reason National Bar, which he said, we're very active in, should not be developing a strategic plan right now to be more intentional, to reach out to the bosses, to whatever ethnic or group, to make sure we are taking care of this problem that we're going to have. We know it's happening. COVID has affected everybody. It's affected our practices. So why aren't we thinking ahead and saying, you know what, let's do something about it. Let's be intentional. So I just think this is a challenge for us right now that Juan has put this out here. We just need to act simply and do something about it, not sit by the wayside.
So Jamie, to your point, let me throw this out because I'm literally in the middle of planning this. It's not structured yet or anything, but after talking to this law student who's a first year at Vanderbilt, I offered her and her classmates from the Balsa chapter an opportunity to get on a Zoom call. And I was going to literally invite 10 to 15 to 20 of my closest lawyer friends across the country and just connect. And so anyone who wants to be part of that, please send me your email or your contact information, and I will invite you to that conversation. I'm literally just trying to find lawyers and judges who want to hire law students next summer. Here are 15, because they have 14 first-year Black law students at Vanderbilt. Here are 14 law students who are looking for an opportunity. Is there a connection? So that's what I'm going to try to do, using my platform with the ABA and the National Bar Association. And I thought to myself, how many other law students are having this problem across the country? That's just one at Vanderbilt. I need to probably reach out to my alma mater to see what's going on at the University of Illinois. And I'm sure all of you have, similar relationships and connections. So that's one idea. If there are others, please share, because I'm not trying to own this. I'm trying to facilitate an opportunity.
And one last point addition to that is that I saw Shakila on here. I think she's still here. Okay, I lost you on the track, but this is why it's so important for our law school leaders who are part of our bar associations to push their membership and even their friends who aren't members to join organizations like the ABA and the NBA and the other associations, because you find out about these things. You don't find out about them if you're not involved. And so at the very least, we have to start pushing that. And then as the more senior people, we need to reach out to these young people and try to explain to them why it's so important. You may not reap the benefits right away, but why it's so important to join these associations, even if it costs you a little bit of money. It's very important for situations just like that. So I'm with you, Juan. Let me know what I can do to help you on that.
And on a much lighter note, I was connected to this law student because she went to Spelman, and I'm a Morehouse grad. I just want to do a shout out to all the HBCUs, because that's literally how I met her. The HBCU love and the Morehouse Spelman, the Spellhouse love. So it's real.
Well,
So
I think what you
women, I co-sign.
That's right.
Well, I think what you're doing is really an indication of our pandemic, in that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, most law firms had, no interest in hiring somebody from Tennessee because they're in California and they'd have to worry about housing and everything else. And now with everything being virtual, it's easy to hire somebody from Vanderbilt and have him or her do work in Vanderbilt. And, to the extent that everything is so digitized now, you send stuff back and forth in an instant. You don't have to worry about files, hard copies of files, or reading through books, or actually even being there. So, I've run a virtual law firm for many years, and a lady who does a lot of my typing is down in South Africa. I have an accountant. I've never met my accountant in person. And so I started this virtual law firm about 15, 20 years ago. But I think a number of people, now that we're so digitized, it's easy to hire people around the country, and they don't need to be in your same town, same city, and deal with housing, et cetera. So Juan, I think you're really onto something, and I think it needs to be part of the strategic plan. So thank you.
But it's an and. Going back to Jamie's comment and about being intentional, when you're talking about different associations, and I'll talk specifically about the ABA, the ABA has to be significantly more intentional about what value the ABA offers to students of color and why there's a place for them within the ABA as well. We sort of understand the value, and I'm sure we sort of learned that coming through the ranks. We just didn't learn that about networking and opportunities, et cetera, when we got to the ABA, right? I'd like to think we actually brought something to the ABA. But what are we doing to make ourselves relevant as an association in the lives of people of color?
Well, I kind of like go back to Jamie's word of intentional, and I'm actually not sure what that means in terms of how we go forward. Is it intentionally noting that somebody's Black or white or Chinese or Japanese or Indian, or is it intentionally ignoring those issues? Is it talking about it? What is I hear that word intentional a lot, but I'm not quite sure of its meaning in this context.
Well, and I will say, just from a general standpoint on when you're advertising a job, for example, and we've been on search committees, we've been in the ability to hire. You can't just advertise in a vanilla way and then just say, oh, we advertise and we're open to put that in our little statement, and then those affinity groups are, because that's where people are checking their emails, where they see that information come through. And then there's a suggestion that, oh, they really are interested in somebody diverse, and they're coming to us so that they can have a diverse pool of candidates. It can be as simple as that you are making the affirmative step yourself to get to those communities if you're truly interested in having a diverse hire.
Yeah, I think it's intentional about your actions. So if you're actually trying to move the needle, you have to be intentional about your actions. And like, for example, for our section conference at the LEL section, I wanted to make sure that all of our panels were permeated with diversity. So as we planned that conference, I would sit in the meetings and say, is this panel permeated with diversity? Like, let's, look, further. And also, I made sure that the planning committee itself was diverse, because diversity begets diversity. And so we had a number of people of color on the planning committee, and that actually helped us get, more attorneys of color and other types of diversity at our section conference. And so, for example, this past year, about 60% of our speakers were racially diverse or attorneys of color, which is more than double that we've ever had in the 14 years that we've had the conference, because we were intentional about just, making sure that it wasn't just meeting the ABA minimum requirements of having like one diverse person if you have 4 people on the panel. It was permeating the panels with diversity. So some of our panels were like this. It had like all racially diverse speakers, and so, which was great. We were very unapologetic about that. And so it's more like intentionally creating opportunities, and like we can actually also, and I think that we need to be intentional about creating economic opportunities for each other, because we do want to help those who come behind us, and we, stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we don't have economic power, then that lessens our ability to help those who come behind us. So, for example, all of these, corporations are making like these statements about Black Lives Matter. We're like, okay, we understand what you're saying, but what are you doing? Like, who's in your C-suite? Who's on your board? Who are you hiring as your outside counsel? Another shout out to Sheila Boston. Who are you hiring as your outside counsel? Are you hiring Black lawyers, like, as your outside counsel? Like, what are you doing there? And so, the corporations need to be intentional about their actions and not just like their statements. We need to be intentional about, referring business, to each other and supporting each other, or, helping each other, with our law students. Like, oh, I have like this person, like, just happened here. You may be interested in like sending the resumes around. So it's being intentional in our actions to help move the needle.
Okay, see, I agree with Samantha wholeheartedly. I just want to add an additional point that we're talking about doing it and being intentional and on purpose. You mentioned whether it's doing something in furtherance or if we something just merely, in avoidance and not talking about it. I want to make sure that we're clear here today that I think I speak for all the panelists when I say we for us, intentional being on purpose is being action, not inaction. So if you don't seem to, you pretend you don't know what color we are, that you don't see color, to us, that is not being intentional. That's the opposite of being intentional. To be intentional, you taking concrete steps to make a difference. So in the ABA, we have these, most of our divisions and sections, we have these fellowships. So we should do more than just offer a fellowship for a year or we finance them. We got to do things that make them feel comfortable once they're here. Because if they're uncomfortable here, they're not going to stay here very long. So we do things to make sure that they're comfortable. We make sure they get continued leadership positions. There's so much we can do in the ABA to be intentional and to make a difference. We had each other. Most of us came through Young Lawyers. We all having a good time together. And then we built these bonds, and then we stood together and made sure we continue to put in the effort and do the good work, which is what we're doing now. And we're challenging everybody else to do the same, to do it, to make a difference. So the next time we have this panel, we won't have just 5 of us sitting here. We'll have 20 of us sitting here and let the conversation continue from there.
So I want to bring up one other area before we close out, if I may, and that's in the world of litigation, whether it be criminal, civil, or administrative. But I'm afraid that this racial tendencies has really taken over the courts in some ways. And so I'm wondering what kind of proactivity the ABA is doing to get either lawyers to help educate judges on this, to educate judges, and perhaps our infamous judge on the panel can help us with this, and to try to de-racialize the courts where perhaps people of color, whether they be Black, Asian, or what have you, or American Indian, whether or not there's something we can do as lawyers to make sure that education process speeds up.
So I'll allow the judge to go first.
No, I'll order you. Go ahead. You wanted to.
I'll order you.
Because you're a prosecutor, and we talked a little bit about this too. Go ahead.
Well, although the question was about the courts, right? Yeah, that's one place to start, is about prosecutors, because I've always preached, and I think it's accepted, that when you talk about the key actors in the criminal justice system, the prosecutor is the one who's got the most power, in the sense of the fact that they can exercise the most discretion without the least amount of oversight. And so I was the founding director of the Prosecution and Racial Justice Program at the very institute, and was specifically working with prosecutors about racially biased decision-making in prosecutor offices and their unwarranted disparities. And it goes back, it's so funny how these things all connect. It goes back to something that Alfreda said. So I'll often hear, oh, we don't see color. Now, I'm a prosecutor, and I can tell you, if you can't pick up a court case file and read that file and know where that case came from, et cetera, and have a better than 75% success rate in guessing the ethnicity of that person, you probably don't need to be there. And so it's, yes, we're not talking about you not seeing someone. We're talking about you actually seeing the individuals and for who they are. I actually started the implicit bias work with the criminal justice section a number of years ago, when we had our racial implicit bias project. And I've got to say, Judge Donald and Professor Redfield, they took that earlier work and put it on steroids. And so in my work where I've trained judges, I've trained prosecutors, I've trained parole and probation officers. Just within the past number of years, I can't tell you the number of presentations that Professor Donald and, Judge Donald and Professor Redfield has been involved in. But one of the key things that I always make, doing a 90-minute or a couple of hours of a presentation is just that. It's only a presentation. when you talk about doing work within this implicit bias environment, not only are you talking about an extensive amount of training, but you're talking about ongoing training. You're talking about developing certain checks and balances. And as I used to tell folks that I worked with, my first goal wasn't to change hearts. It was to set up systems to manage conduct. And if in managing the conduct, you became more aware, and ultimately we can start having conversations about a change of heart and privileges, et cetera. I was more than open and welcome to do that. The last point I'll make is I'm very concerned about the use of the phrase implicit bias just becoming a synonym for racism, because it's not. And it's very important that we realize that each and every one of us, we have our own implicit prejudices and preferences. And we've always got to remember that and do the work ourselves in order to be able to effectively influence individuals around us.
Can I quickly add to that real quick, Casey?
Yes.
Quickly. And I love what Wayne just said about the term implicit bias and explicit, these soft terms. And this is controversial, and I really don't care. One of the problems that we have when we talk about these issues is that we use language to make white people comfortable. We're always trying to make white people comfortable. And it goes back to what Marian Jacobson said about this notion of power. We're afraid to offend them because they have all the power. They still control most of the corporate law firm jobs. Most judges are white. Most people in public office who are in power are white. And we know that. And so all of us as African Americans, other people of color, we know we're always trying not to offend them. And let me just say, with all due respect to all of my white friends, and I call you my brothers and sisters, I'm tired of making you comfortable.
Well, but let me turn it around.
So one last point, so that we can not deal with the racism in our structures, in our democracy, and in our profession.
So I'm uncomfortable with the opposite. I have lots of Black friends, Black associates, Black family members, but I'm uncomfortable bringing up the issue. So I think that what the last 6 months of this and dealing with this in the ABA has said that it's okay to bring up the issue. And I think that's really the thing, is because I don't bring it up because, as Alfreda said, I don't see color. And I guess, and I guess the option is it's not embarrassing to say, you know what, Juan, you're a Black man and I want to get your Black perspective on this. And what am I missing?
I'll make the real quick analogy. It's like only women talking about sexism. That's not a fruitful conversation if you're not going to bring men into the conversation, because men, we're the ones who are sexist.
You're not the only ones, Juan. Women are sexist too.
I know.
What white fragility is all about.
Yes, exactly. Because many times in sexist conversations, some women incorporate the mindset of sexist men. Right. So when I hear women say a woman shouldn't be president, I'm like, what? But I've heard women say that. That's crazy to me. So
that's 2016.
Right. But yes, we need white allies to talk about this with your family, with your colleagues, with your cousins, and with all those folks. I know we can't get into politics, but a lot of your cousins, white folk, voted for somebody in November. Y'all got to talk to them because they ain't gonna listen to us. Those your cousins.
And one of the things about 2020 that has made this a little bit easier, like Juan was saying earlier and what Samantha was saying about not doing things intentionally and unapologetically. 2020 although all the pain that it has caused with the murders of a Black men and Black women, it has forced conversations, and it has emboldened us to be able to bring up things that otherwise people would run from and try to avoid at all costs, but to be able to have the conversations, have frank conversations like we're doing today, and to be able to continue those conversations. So I'm happy that we're having this conversation. Just like Juan said, we need to include some others on the call, on the discussions as well, so we can all grow in this process, and we can do what we're dedicating our time to in GPSolo this year. One of our initiatives is activate diversity. What could each one of us do to make a difference in diversity this year? And not having a conversation, it can't be the answer. The answer is to be overt in your actions and intentional and do something. And if I may just briefly add, I think there's a link in the chat and Steve can repost it. What we were asking for personal commitments from everyone to say what you are doing and what you can do to activate diversity. Now, we don't necessarily want theories of what could be done, somebody else can do, but what you can do or someone like you can do. So if you have a moment to be able to click on that and give us like a 30-second recording at some point, I'm saying what you can do for diversity, I think that'll be greatly appreciated.
Well,
I know
let me stop you there for a sec. You know, we've heard things like hiring people of color and maybe mentoring people of color sort of came up a little bit, but we could probably use some more examples from you and the other members of the panel to find out exactly what kinds of things are appropriate or lack thereof inappropriate. You know, and at what point does it come to where we need to learn how to educate if we find opposing counsel being particularly either implicitly or explicitly racist? How are we supposed to guide that discussion? Or we find a judge being particularly implicit or explicit from a racist standpoint? How are we supposed to deal with those situations?
So can I give I'll give you a hard, firm example that I had in the past, where I was working with one prosecutor office, and it was clear the office needed to be more diverse. And the district attorney said, I'm trying to hire more Black prosecutors, but I can't find them. So I asked, well, what is it specifically that you're doing? This person went to undergrad at UNC and law school at Duke and had great connections in both spaces, and said he reached out to the dean of both law schools and asked them to send him their top Black students, a list of their top Black students. And he tried to reach out to each one individually to encourage them to interview for a job. Well, number one, we already know the lack of diversity in Blacks in those two law schools when you're talking about the top law schools. And he's asking those top students from those highly respected law schools to come and work in his office for $30,000 a year. So he did a number of things wrong. I was actually able to connect him with the National Black Prosecutors and basically say, if you're going to send someone there, don't send someone to give out information about your office. Send someone there who's got decision-making authority. So that's one concrete example.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Hello? Yeah. One point that I wanted to point out, that in that same area is North Carolina Central University Law School, which is a historically Black law school and one of the top trial lawyers in the world. I mean, Willie Gary is out of that school. There are a number of others. So he was looking in the wrong place.
I have an interesting one. Sorry, my printer is in the background because I'm trying to meet a deadline, but I have an interesting one that might be useful for all of us because we're solos. I'm not a first generation lawyer, and I always try to remind myself of that because I'm a person of color, and I realize like I'm not going to eat into opportunities that are more like that I've done much less than a first generation college student and a first generation law student to do where I am. So whenever I see somebody who's as skilled or more skilled than me, I recognize they're way more skilled than I could ever be. on that note, I keep a list of which first generation lawyers, women of color, I can refer work to, because I find that that's really useful. So if you get a client and that client is looking for a lawyer and you can't help them, it's really useful to have a list of first generation law students, especially minorities, especially African-American lawyers, who you can refer them to. I think it's a really small thing, but especially if you're referring business to people who are working in firms, it helps them get towards the partnership track. And even for solos, it helps their business. So I think that might be a good list or a good way. If that's wrong or I can do it any better, then I'd also be happy to know.
I think the other thing maybe the bar can do is provide some kind of mentorship opportunity. And GPSolos, we can always find 5 or 10 minutes to do sort of, I hate to use the phrase big brother program, but kind of like that, a mentorship program that we can hook up with these law students and have somebody that they can build a relationship with and use our connections that we have. I mean, I'm a first generation lawyer. I guess my great grandfather was way back when, but I don't have any of his connections. So I think that, to the extent that these people don't have those connections or don't have that, some kind of mentoring program that we could set up, some kind of easy introduction thing, especially now where we don't have cocktail parties or other things to go to. One, please feel free to have anybody reach out to the Roundtable, and we can set that up through this program or something else. But I think that could be very helpful to people who don't have the connections, whether they're Black, white, Indian, what have you, Asian. We can all succeed together in this process.
And the ABA has a very active and great law student division, and they've actually rolled out a number of programs this year. And actually I'm building on prior years as well, specifically geared to law students. I actually went to a presentation about all they were doing to bring in law students, because I think the ABA leadership recognizes the value in doing so. So I would encourage, all of the sections to partner with the ABA's law student division in these efforts and have us all coordinate together.
And here in the division, I'm sure in other entities, we have a law student liaison that sits on our council, and we have a young lawyer that sits on our council, so that we can have a direct contact to the needs that they have, so we can do what we can to try to assist. So we do have those programs. I know in the division, we also look under the leadership of my chair-elect next year, looking to roll out a program where we will be assisting in getting jobs all in solo areas. So I think those are some of the things that are being done in different entities, and we just need to do more of it, especially here in the ABA. We need to make sure we stomp our foot and put our stamp on it to make sure that we're here to stay. And these are the things that we can do to make the ABA looks like the rest of the world.
Well, thank you.
And that's the great thing about coordinating in this roundtable, that we have all these different sections, divisions that are represented here, because we can all coordinate and support and help each other. And I will just also throw in one thing that I want to also just talk about briefly. So I'm also vice chair of the Minority Corporate Counsel Association. And we're also very focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, obviously, and have come out with a number of initiatives. But something that we always talk about when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is making sure that we're measuring, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. And so we need to while we're being intentional, we need to set our goals and set our sights and measure what's being done, so we can see whether what we're doing is working, whether we're making progress, whether we need to calibrate. And so I would just focus on I would just make sure that we include, actual measurements. So we're not sort of just out there saying, oh yeah, we're doing this, and nothing's actually, getting done, in terms of moving forward.
We're down to the last few minutes, so I'd like the panelists to give a quick closing remark, each of them. So why don't we start with our dear esteemed judge.
Just want to say thank you for this opportunity again. And I do believe that we all need to collaborate. We need to be more intentional. We need to be more sensitive, because we are all in positions of power. So we have the opportunity to influence others, to also create dialogue around issues, but mostly we have the opportunity to make change and be agents of change very intentionally.
Thank you, Judge Childs. Wayne, you're up next. Closing remark.
Sure. First, I would just like to thank the host for putting this panel together and for getting us together. I felt like I'm taking away far more than I'm contributing. And in fact, I think this is like an iceberg conversation, right?
Without question.
Tip, and there's so much more that we can discuss. And I'm hoping that we have the opportunity to do so.
Well, let's do it in January again. I think it's good for all of us. Juan, you're up next.
I want to thank you all again for inviting me to this conversation. I truly enjoyed seeing all of you and being part of this conversation. And I just want to remind us of the power, not only that we have individually as lawyers and judges, but the power of our profession. And here's what I mean. When we're going to talk about fighting structural racism and systemic racism, we're often talking about changing law and public policy. And that's our sweet spot. That's what we do. We engage law, we engage public policy. But the reality of that means is that we're going to be oftentimes talking about changing structures and institutions that we are in control of or have access to, or one person removed that we are close to is at that table. We're really talking about changing the very nature of our own profession and how laws and public policy impact people's lives. And so we can't talk about this in the abstract. We're really talking about ourselves. And we've been blessed to be educated to be agents of change, or to paraphrase the past dean of Howard's Law School, social engineers, and not a parasite on society.
Thank you. Then thanks for attending and thanks for all your great words. Samantha, you're last.
I'm last, actually, Casey.
Well, I was going to let Samantha go and then you were going to go last. Samantha, you got 1 minute.
So thank you, first of all, for inviting me to join this roundtable. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel and speak about these very important topics. I echo everybody else's, closing remarks in terms of us, using our power that we have, quite frankly, even as leaders, in the bar, and making sure that we create opportunities and space for, others who are coming behind us. And certainly as, the first woman of color chair of the LEL section, my goal is to make sure that there are other women of color who also have the opportunity to chair the section. And I think, it's our job to be encouraging and supportive of others. And I just want to, again, thank Judge Donald, just because she is such an inspiring leader to so many of us across all of the sections. And she was probably the first, or one of the first two people, Cindy Nance was the other huge supporter of mine, who said to me, you can be the first woman of color chair. You can chair the labor employment law section. You should do that. You should set your sights on that. And I think, just having, rooting people on and encouraging them really does help and does go a long way. And it's my plan to continue to do that, within our LEL section and across the bar. And I hope that, in the not too distant future, that the ABA looks like the NBA, the HNBA, NAPABA, and the LGBT bar combined. We should reflect what those bars look like, and hopefully we're moving towards that.
Thank you, Samantha. All right, Alfreda, your turn to
wrap us up. Thank you again to the panelists for being here. This has been a very insightful discussion, and I think we're all very sincere when we say we want to continue these discussions. So this roundtable that we're having, this platform is available every week. We're going to take a couple weeks off in December, but as Casey mentioned, this is available every week. So anytime that we want to come back here and pick up this discussion, we're more than willing and happy to do so. Also encourage the panelists, if you want to do something on your platform or your individual sections or divisions, I think we can also gather and do some joint programming in those areas. although I would like to take all the credit for this very impactful conversation. I have to give a special shout out to Judge Childs, who her and I in just a little vent session, just talking on the phone, she said, this would be a good idea. We all speak to each other. And this thing she knows, I done added it to my summit agenda. And now it's an event to invite others to. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to Judge Childs. Thank you for KC for allowing us to join your regular schedule roundtable. I also wanted to take a moment to add that we have our diversity committee. They have Activate Diversity. Our next event is Pathways to Equal Justice. It's going to take place on January the 21st. I'm inviting all of you to participate. And it's going to be a panel just talking about criminal justice reform. I think many of you on the panelists today can add to that. So I hope you're available to join us again. And lastly, I want to give a big thanks to my membership. I've been in this section, this division for almost 20 years. And I've been able to be in leadership from the first time that I've joined. And those of you know me that sometimes I can be strong and hard and then other times I'm laughing more than anybody in the room. But I do want to thank my membership for embracing me for who I am, allowing me to take positions that may not be comfortable and still supporting me in so doing. So thank you for all of my membership and to all of the attendees for joining us. Casey?
Thank you so much, Alfreda. Thank you so much to the panelists. We really appreciated all the discussion, and we can't wait to continue it. Alfreda, are there more events scheduled this afternoon for the summit that we should attend?
There's not any more today, but there is tomorrow. We have 2 events scheduled tomorrow. One is free legal answers. We're doing a pro bono opportunity. If you want to join in and do basically a legal clinic virtually, we're doing that tomorrow morning. And then we have our Difference Makers Awards. And that is going to be a true highlight for tomorrow. I think we have 5 award recipients. Maybe staff can post something in the chat on that we're going to recognize people for making a difference in the lives of others. We recognize here on this platform how important it is. We were just talking about how important that is. And this is to recognize those people who are already doing the things that we say need to be done, making a difference in the community, making a difference in the bar associations, making a difference in law students' lives, just making a difference to change the world so we can be the change that we want to see, as Judge Childs indicated. So please feel free to join us tomorrow for that as well.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody in the ABA and especially the staff members, Sherry and Steve and Molly and Kim, who I think are all still on. So without them, we couldn't have gotten this done. So your time and efforts are completely appreciated. Thanks so much, and everybody have a great rest of the week and a great weekend. And if we don't see you, a good holiday season.
And stay safe.
Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you, everyone. Be well, be safe.
Bye.